There is a law in history that has swept away three global superpowers in the past 500 years. And right now, in 2025, the United States is following that exact trajectory, step by step, decision by decision, almost as if we are reenacting the very script that once ended in collapse. In 1590, Spain was the richest empire on the planet. They controlled half the world's gold and silver. Their armies dominated Europe. Their currency was used everywhere. In less than a century, they went bankrupt, lost their colonies, and never returned to superpower status. In 1914, Britain stood at the pinnacle of the world. Their empire spanned 5 continents. The sun never set on the Union Jack. The British pound was the global currency, a symbol of stability and strength. 40 years later, that empire dissolved. The currency collapsed, colonies broke away, and Britain became a dependent ally of America. By 1991, the Soviet Union was the remaining superpower. They possessed a massive nuclear arsenal, a worldwide satellite system, and the belief that their ideology would dominate the future. But in just 900 days, that empire vanished. Not because of war, but because its economy collapsed from within 3 times. 3 superpowers. 3 identical outcomes, all following the same power curve: expansion, exhaustion, disintegration. And what sends chills down the spine is that the United States today is at that exact point. Stage 5, the superpower transition phase. This is not just history repeating itself. This is the pattern of global dynamics. Empires do not die from military defeat. They die from financial exhaustion. The collapse of power does not begin with bullets or falling flags, but with numbers that can no longer balance. Every empire starts with expansion. Armies pushing beyond borders, merchant ships crossing oceans, commitments and alliances sprouting everywhere. In the early phase, confidence overflows. Resources pour in, the currency strengthens, belief becomes the fuel for the empire to swell. But at a certain point, the cost of maintaining that vast network exceeds the ability to generate real value. From there, the weakening begins quietly, not immediately visible. The government starts printing money, borrowing, taxing the future to feed the present. They sustain the illusion of prosperity with figures and promises. Meanwhile, productivity declines. The elite grow increasingly detached from reality, and the people begin to doubt the very institutions they once trusted. When the signs become clear, the exterior still looks solid. The currency still circulates, the military still marches, the national flag still flies. But inside, the foundation is rotting. Trust, the most precious asset of an empire, begins to crack. Then comes the moment when capital flees, allies turn away, and everything collapses, not from an external blow, but from its own weight. History shows that the fall of an empire is not an event, but a process, starting with exhaustion, spreading to loss of trust, and ending in the emptiness of power. Every empire believes it is the exception, that its strength, weapons, or intellect will make the law stop. But no exception survives when the mathematics of power turns against it. And that pattern has begun to repeat for the first time, with Spain. After 1492, when Columbus opened the path to the New World, Spain entered a phase where they believed God had chosen them as the center of humanity. Gold and silver from the Americas flowed in endlessly, flooding the royal treasury. Ships heavy with precious metals docked at Seville each year, turning the country into the first superpower of the modern era. Stage 1. Expansion and glory. In just a few decades, Spain controlled nearly half the world map, from South America to the Philippines, from the Netherlands to Italy. The empire spanned 4 continents, their armies were invincible, and the Spanish silver dollar became the first international currency, circulating from Europe to Asia. That prosperityness created a blind belief that their power was eternal. But that was also when Stage 2 began: overload and debt. War became the empire's lifeblood. Spain simultaneously confronted France, England, the Ottomans, and revolts in the Netherlands. Half the national revenue went to the military, and still wasn't enough. To sustain the empire, King Philip II borrowed from everywhere. Italian banks, German ones, even private merchants. When the income from gold and silver couldn't cover expenses, they chose the easiest path: printing money. Stage 3. Currency devaluation. To pay debts, the crown diluted silver with copper, turning the real into the counterfeit paper of the 16th century. On the books, the value stayed the same, but in reality, trust collapsed. Inflation spread across Europe, domestic goods became expensive, foreign merchants exploited the situation, and the flow of gold and silver outpaced its arrival. Stage 4. Societal rot. Spanish nobility viewed labor as beneath them, refusing to produce, living only on taxes and prestige. Agriculture stagnated, industry vanished, and the country began importing everything from food to weapons. They had all the world's gold and silver, but created no value. When the silver mines in the Americas ran dry, the empire collapsed like a sandcastle. Stage 5. Bankruptcy. In 40 years, Spain declared bankruptcy 4 times, lost Portugal, lost the Netherlands, its most prosperous economic center. By the 17th century, the empire that once dominated the world was merely a shadow of itself, vast on the map, but hollow in reality. At the beginning of the 20th century, Britain stood at the pinnacle of the industrial world. They controlled a quarter of the planet, nearly 400 million people under the Union Jack, and the British pound was the global currency. Stage 1. Global peak. London was the heart of world finance, where every major trade contract was denominated in pounds. British merchant ships connected 5 continents. British armies stretched across 6, and the saying "the sun never sets on the British Empire" was not just a metaphor but reality. But right then, Stage 2 began forming quietly. Overload and debt. When World War I broke out in 1914, Britain had to choose between neutrality to preserve wealth or war to protect influence. They chose to fight and paid with their finances. The war cost over $40 billion, equivalent to trillions today, forcing them to borrow massively from America. By war's end, the position of world's creditor had switched. Britain became the debtor, America the new creditor. But faith in old strength made them cling to the image of an all-powerful empire. Then World War II arrived, and the cost was many times greater. Britain won, but was exhausted. Stage 3. Loss of gold. Loss of trust. Before the war, the pound was backed by gold. After, the vaults were empty. They tried to maintain the exchange rate with austerity and high interest rates, but the market didn't believe. In 1931, Britain was forced to abandon the gold standard. The pound fell 25% overnight. A currency that once symbolized stability now became a symbol of weakness. Stage 4. Internal fractures. As economic power wavered, social cracks appeared. Industry stagnated. Strikes spread. People grew weary of belt tightening. At the same time, independence movements flared in the colonies, India, Egypt, Southeast Asia, Africa. The empire could no longer control them. Every domestic crisis triggered a separatist movement abroad. And then Stage 5, loss of empire. In 1947, Britain was forced to grant independence to India, the brightest jewel in the imperial crown. Then came the domino collapse. Territories followed one after another from the Middle East to Africa, from the Caribbean to the Pacific. By the 1970s, the so-called British Empire existed only in history and symbolism. They still had the throne, the Queen, a permanent UN Security Council seat, and nuclear. While the smoke and fire of World War II gradually cleared, the Soviet Union emerged from the ashes like a colossal victor. They had defeated Nazi Germany, occupied half of Europe, and built the image of a new empire, one not based on colonies, but on ideology. Stage 1, the rise of planned power. In the eyes of millions, communism was the future. The Soviet Union controlled Eastern Europe, supported revolutionary movements worldwide, launched the first satellite into orbit, and believed it would replace the West. They thought their system was so perfect, it could not fail. But beneath the surface of victory, Stage 2 had already begun. The enormous cost of maintaining the empire, holding Eastern Europe in a tight grip, required a massive army, a dense security network, and absolute control. Racing America in every field, from missiles to nuclear weapons, drained the economy's energy. Nearly 20% of GDP went to defense, 3 times America's level, while output and technology lagged far behind. In 1979, they bogged down in Afghanistan, bleeding both blood and money. The Soviet Union wanted to prove its strength, but the more it proved, the more exhausted it became. Stage 3. The ruble loses value. No one outside the borders trusted their currency. Even citizens inside hoarded dollars. To buy goods and equipment from the West, the government used gold and oil, the only real assets left. When global oil prices collapsed in the mid-1980s, revenue crumbled, gold reserves dwindled, foreign currency vanished, and the entire financial system entered a suffocating phase. Stage 4. Systemic gridlock. Factories still ran but produced low-quality goods no one wanted. Stores stood empty. Agriculture failed. People queued for bread and soap. No one believed in the socialist paradise they had been promised. When trust dissolved, no bombs or bullets were needed. Just a small push, and then Stage 5 arrived in 1989. The Berlin Wall fell. Eastern European countries left Moscow's orbit one by one. 2 years later, in December 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved. After 1945, the United States emerged from World War II as the absolute victor. Not only the sole possessor of the atomic bomb, America also held half of global industrial output. Stage 1. Era of expansion and dominance. American goods, technology, and cultures spread worldwide. The dollar became the international reserve currency, tightly pegged to gold, and the US became the center of trade, finance, and innovation. The Bretton Woods system forced every nation to hold USD, and for decades Americans believed that order was eternal. Silicon Valley exploded. American technology led humanity. But then Stage 2 began: global overreach, overextension. In the intoxication of Cold War power, America built a network of over 750 military bases in 80 countries, maintained troops in 150 nations, and committed to defending nearly the entire West. From Korea to Iraq, from Germany to Japan, the United States was both protector and paymaster. The cost of that global empire exceeded self-sustainability. Defense spending topped 850 billion USD annually, more than the next 10 nations combined. Meanwhile, public debt ballooned beyond GDP, and endless wars, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, turned into black holes swallowing finances and trust. When the system began to falter, America chose the easiest path: printing money. Stage 3. The dollar eroded. In 1971, Nixon ended the gold standard, turning USD into pure fiat currency, and since then money supply has grown hundreds of times over. In the past 2 decades, America printed over $6 trillion to rescue the economy from crises from 2008 to 2020, but each rescue further weakened trust. Brexit is rising. China and Russia trade in local currencies. Saudi Arabia accepts oil payments in UN, and central banks quietly buy gold. The world is seeking an exit from the dollar system. As money loses value, purchasing power weakens, and the dollar is no longer paper gold, America's financial superpower status begins to waver. Stage 4. Internal fractures. While outwardly still wealthy and powerful, America is deeply divided from within. Politics is polarized to paralysis. Trust in institutions at record lows. Americans no longer believe in Congress, the media, or the markets. Labor productivity has stagnated for over 2 decades. The middle class, the foundation of the American dream, is crushed between inflation, student debt, and wealth inequality. Crime, addiction, and homelessness spread. Half the nation lives in skepticism, the other half in anger. The signs of decay once seen in Rome, Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union now reflect in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. And then Stage 5. The transition point. This is the fateful crossroads of an empire. America can choose restructuring, as it did after the Great Depression, focusing on productivity, reindustrialization, investing in education, artificial intelligence, clean energy, and restoring social trust. It can turn crisis into opportunity, using technology and democracy to renew the old model. But it can also slide when the world abandons the dollar, when public debt becomes uncontrollable, and when Americans themselves no longer trust their currency. If that path unfolds, America will become Britain 2.0, still with nuclear weapons, still with status, but without real weight in the global balance. Their future depends not on guns, warships, or the central bank, but on trust. Trust that this nation can change before it is forced to change. History does not repeat, but it has patterns. And America is walking in that pattern, the final step, where every empire must choose between rebirth and collapse. Today, America is looking at itself in the mirror of the 3 empires before, and that mirror is trembling. If we view the entire historical sequence as an equation, we see the same curve repeating 4 times over the past 5 centuries. Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union, and now the United States, different in language, culture, institutions, yet all passing through the exact same 5 stages. They all begin with expansion and confidence, reach the peak of power, then exceed the capacity to sustain it, spiral into debt, declining productivity, loss of trust, and finally forced transition. The starting point of each empire is when economic strength feeds power, and the end point is when power drains the economy. Spain collapsed because it thought gold was wealth. Britain fell because it believed debt could prolong power. The Soviet Union crumbled because it trusted ideology could replace efficiency, and America today is testing the same limit: the belief that technology and finance can compensate for production and real balance. But the numbers don't lie. When the cost of maintaining power exceeds the real value the economy creates, the collapse cycle is only a matter of time. Imperial decline is not emotion, not political opinion. It is mathematics. A simple equation: overreach plus debt. Productivity equals sign collapse. When the first variable swells, When debt piles up, when productivity stagnates, the result is always the same. Only the speed differs. History can be rewritten with a different pen, but not with different numbers. And if there is one lesson running through from Seville to London, from Moscow to Washington, it is this: no empire is immune to arithmetic. Power can obscure reality for a Stage 5 is not the end. It is the threshold where an empire can choose rebirth or self-destruction. The three superpowers before all collapsed, not from lack of resources, but from lack of courage to change while there was still time. Spain got lost in the illusion of gold and silver. Britain clung to an exhausted empire. The Soviet Union strangled itself with control and fear. All three saw the signals but dared not bend the curve. America today still has an opportunity the others never had: technological productivity, limitless creativity, freedom of thought, and the capacity for self-reform embedded in the nation's DNA. The United States can rebuild manufacturing, lead in clean energy, redefine education, and restore social trust, if it chooses to do so before being forced. The power curve is not fixed, it bends to the hand of those awake enough to understand it. The issue is not that the United States is in stage 5, but how it passes through it. If America uses this phase to purge, to relearn how to create real value, then stage 5 will become the launch pad for a new era. But if it continues to delay, deny, and spend the future to sustain the illusion of the present, the pattern will close exactly as before. History has shown the curve. Mathematics has explained it, but destiny depends on whether we bend it or let it break. Power was once the asset of weapons, then of finance, and now it is trust, the trust of the entire world that America can still be the center of innovation and freedom. If they hold on to that, the cycle can shift direction. If they lose it, the 21st century will simply be the next chapter of the same pattern repeated for 500 years. So, if you want to understand more deeply how the next power cycle will form, subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this analysis series. See you in the next chapter, where we will look straight into the future and see whether America can bend its curve of destiny or not.